come to order. Roll call.
Jolly, Naker, Prince, Tao, Tobert, Yang, Council President Brad Moen. 7 present, no one absent.
We invite you to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consent agenda items 2 through 19 are before you for your consideration.
And we are pulling 19 for separate consideration. Is there anything else on consent that should be considered separately? Seeing none, Mr. Tolbert moves approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The consent agenda is adopted as amended. Item number 19, RLH OA 20-1, making recommendation to Ramsey County on the application of David Chavez for repurchase of tax forfeited property at 721 4th Street East.
Ms. Prince.
We need to lay this over until November 5th while we gather a bit more information.
Till November 5th?
February 5th.
I was like, that is awesome. Just 11
February
months.
5th.
All right, so till February 5th. There's a motion to lay the matter over till February 5th. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is laid over to February 5th. Item number 20, resolution public hearing 20-3, approving adverse action against a liquor on sale, Sunday entertainment, liquor on sale 100 seats or less, and liquor on sale 2 a.m. closing licenses held by Kevin Chua Tao, doing business as Papaya Thai Restaurant at 945 Rice Street.
Mr. Tao.
A quick staff report on this.
Council President Brad Moen, members of council, Teresa Scarda on behalf of the Department of Safety and Inspections. I wasn't here last week, but I did have a chance to review the video in this matter, and it does appear that there was kind of a disagreement as to whether or not the facts were admitted. I don't believe they were. I would ask this matter be moved back to the administrative law judge for some findings and then come back before you all.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Scarda? Ms. Prince.
Ms. Scarda, I just want to be sure that the license holder understands that the ALJ process, if he does not prevail, he will pay for that process.
Council President Brad Moen, Council Member Prince, that isn't actually how that process works. Under St. Paul Legislative Code Section 3105K, I believe, the imposition of costs is really something that is done by you all. It's done by resolution. The department would recommend that costs be imposed. Couple of examples where I've asked for costs on behalf of the department in the 2019 year were cases where licensees asked for a hearing. We showed up at the hearing fully prepared, and they didn't. So, kind of a waste of resources. The 3105K really lays out some specific considerations for council, and when we do ask for costs, or when I ask for them on behalf of the department, I try and lay that out in the resolution for you. So in my memory, most of the times we aren't asking for costs.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. Thank you. That was my misunderstanding.
No problem. Thank you.
I appreciate that clarification because certainly we don't want to dissuade people from going to the ALJ because there's costs attached, and it sounds like only when they request that hearing and don't show up, or other examples where it was not in good faith.
That's correct, and the ultimate decision, Council President Brad Moen, would be up to council.
Okay, great. Mr. Tao.
To Councilmember Prince's last point from the previous public hearing was your mentioning of English as a second language, and so I just want to be clear that Mr. Tao, there's no misunderstanding in the scope of the ALJ, and that this is a process that could be intimidating if you haven't gone through that process yet. And so I'm hoping that has been explained to him, and the whole process, that he walked through the whole process with him.
Council President Brennan, Councilmember Tao, I will tell the council that I started speaking with the licensee before came into order, and I was explaining the process. I also explained that interpreters can be provided by the administrative law judge for both the licensee and for any witnesses that he may call. And I will continue to explain and answer any questions I can.
Okay, thank you. With that, I move to, with the recommendation of our Ms. Teresa.
Okay, so the recommendation is to withdraw and send back to the administrative law judge.
Council President Bredmo, that is the department's recommendation.
Okay, is there any discussion on the motion from Mr. Tao? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The item is withdrawn with the understanding that it will go to the administrative law judge. Item number 21, final adoption of ordinance 19-76, amending Chapter 199 of the Legislative Code pertaining to rabies control.
Is there any final discussion on this item before we vote? Ms. Prince?
Yeah, I want to thank Dan Nijelek from DSI, as well as Kathy Mock and Louisa Roos from the St. Paul Humane Society for being in touch with me over this week to reassure me about my concerns about the cost of recovering companion animals under this new these new fees and fee arrangements. So I'm convinced that these two ordinances have been carefully thought through. So
Any
I
further
will be
discussion?
supporting them.
Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item number 22, final adoption of ordinance 19-77, amending Chapter 200 of the Legislative Code, updating and adding definitions, making owners of impounded animals responsible for veterinary, rabies, and microchipping fees required before release, and prohibiting the release of impounded animals without appropriate restraint.
And any final thoughts on this item before we vote? All right, seeing none, Ms. Prince moves approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item number 23, final adoption of ordinance 19-79, amending Chapter 409 of the Legislative Code to create and define boundaries for an entertainment district named Great Lawn Entertainment District.
Any final thoughts on this one? All right, seeing none, Mr. Tao moves approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item number 24, final adoption of ordinance 19-80, amending Chapter 246 of the Legislative Code to allow the possession or consumption of non-intoxicating malt liquor, strong beer, or wine purchased and consumed during a block party, festival, or community event with the Great Lawn Entertainment District.
Any final discussion on this item? Seeing none, Mr. Tao moves approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item number 25, final adoption of ordinance 19-81, creating Title 31 to be entitled City Sustainability and Resiliency, and Chapter 440 of the Legislative Code relating to the regulation of building energy consumption through the establishment of regulations.
And again, this is final adoption. Is there any thoughts on this one before we vote? Seeing none, Ms. Naker moves approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item number 26, second reading of ordinance 20-4, granting the application of Bonfee Properties LLP to rezone property at 337 7th Street West, 366 Smith Avenue North, and 372 Smith Avenue North from T2 to T3 traditional neighborhood, and amending Chapter 60 of the Legislative Code pertaining to the zoning map. This ordinance is laid over to February 5th for third reading public hearing. Item number 27, second reading of ordinance 20-6, granting the application of Brad Graves to rezone property at 1035 Arkwright Street from RT2 Townhouse Residential to RM2 Multiple Family Residential, and amending Chapter 60 of the Legislative Code pertaining to the zoning map. This ordinance is laid over to February 5th for third reading public hearing. Legislative hearing consent agenda items 28 through 64 are before you for your consideration.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mormond.
Good afternoon, Council President. I'm aware of one party here to testify, item number 35.
Item number 35, RLH BVR 20-1, appeal of Chris Samuel, Ramsey County property tax forfeited land, state, and Minnesota trust exempt to a vacant building registration notice at 603 Edmond Avenue.
Ms. Mormond.
Council President, you may recall that several months ago you heard an appeal on the condemnation in order to vacate this property. At that point in time, the council denied the appeal, and it was condemned and ordered vacated. The council maintained that. What's in front of you today is the vacant building registration that follows the condemnation. The county auditor, Mr. Chris Samuel, filed an appeal, as this is tax forfeited land. The appeal had three components to it. The first had to do with the vacant building fee itself. The second had to do with what the criteria or standard would be for rehabilitation. And the third had to do with whether or not the property could be occupied prior to all of the work being complete, bringing it back up to minimum standards. The first part, the vacant building fee itself, the letter that the county received was the standard letter that the city issues to register a vacant building, which quotes the $2,000-some fee that goes with registering a vacant building. The county, of course, under Chapter 43 of the Legislative Code, has a discounted vacant building fee, which is approximately 1/4 of the vacant building fee that others are charged, ostensibly because they have a very strong property management team. That, I hope, was clarified. There was a follow-up question with respect to other properties that the county has vacant buildings for, and I learned in reviewing this case that vacant building fees for Ramsey County are charged out once a year, instead of, like everyone else, where they're billed out as they occur. So if you have a vacant building that becomes vacant in June, you get a bill in June. You'll get a bill next June and the June after that until it's out of the vacant building program. The county, instead of that, the city invoices them at a point in time in January just for the vacant buildings that are in the program in January. So they get a bill that's probably a bill that's smaller than would otherwise be given if they were paying for big buildings throughout the year that went through the program. The question, I believe, from the county about this was, if we sell a property at auction and somebody has to pay a vacant building fee, didn't we just pay that vacant building fee? And doesn't that cover from January to January? I think the discussion on this, whether that vacant building fee covered January to January or June to June and you happen to pay in January, is something that needs to happen between the Tax Forfeited Lands Division and the Department of Safety and Inspections, and perhaps this means that properties should be invoiced individually. This is an administrative matter. I would say the council does not need to act on that. The fee was already straightened out and clarified at the lower level.
And you're suggesting that this is something that the county and the city can work with to fix. It sounds like the simple fact that the city sends a standard vacant building fee to the county, even though the county has a different arrangement under the code, is problematic and something that needs to be fixed.
It appears that they're not operating with the same understanding right now. That could just be like transitions in staff where the old way of doing things didn't quite get, translated to the next person to undertaking a task. It's a conversation between administrative staff, I think.
And it needs a global fix, not just for this particular property.
I think that sometimes it's helpful to just hit the reset button, but I
Okay.
would say that's really up to the department.
Okay.
Second issue, what is the standard that should be applied for rehabilitation? This is, in my estimation, my recommendation to the council, a Category 2 registered vacant building because it meets the two key prongs of the definition of Category 2. It has been condemned and it has major code violations. That makes it a Category 2. If it is a Category 2 registered vacant building, the standard to bring it up to minimum quality is the code compliance inspection report itself. The county, at the time of the legislative hearing, had conducted the code compliance inspection report. They walked in with it. I think that's a de facto agreement that the code compliance is actually required to do the work. Third question that was posed in the appeals process was, can this property be reoccupied prior to all of the work being completed? I do not think that question is appropriately posed to the City Council. I think that question is one for the building official. My recommendation to the county and anyone who would be involved in doing the rehabilitation of the building would be that the contractor, developer, architect, whoever the person is doing the scope of work, develop that scope of work with a specific proposal about what things need to be done before it can be reoccupied, and have the building official at the city review that plan. So it's a duplex, maybe rehabbing the entire first floor unit, fixing the roof, the plumbing, could all come together as a package, and the building official could maybe say, yes, I will let you live in this one unit, but not other parts of the house. That is not a decision for the council. The council is not, as you already know, the building code authority for the state of Minnesota. That is the building official, and then it goes to the state of Minnesota. The building official was in the legislative hearing. Steve Ubel was present and did make a commitment to review any and all proposals coming forward that would provide alternatives. The standard, however, is that everything needs to be done to bring it up to minimum standards before reoccupation. So this would be a significant deviation from that. Usually the only thing that would wait are weather-dependent things. You have all the work done in February, but you don't have the painting done, they'll often, always let somebody move in and get the painting done later. This isn't painting. This is something more serious. So that's my report on the 3 prongs of the appeal that was filed, and I believe Mr. Samuel has some commentary for you.
All right, and it sounds like many of the issues that were brought forth are not actually germane to the property, the property tax forfeited property and being registered as a vacant building. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions for Ms. Mormon? Mr. Tolbert?
Just off that question, can you summarize very briefly what is the sole issue that we're deciding here today?
I think the key issue, because the fee is a given and it's outlined in the legislative code distinctly, the key issue is whether or not a code compliance is required in this, and if the building needs to be code compliant before it's reoccupied. My recommendation is to stick with the legislative code, which requires that a code compliance be the standard prior to reoccupation.
And again, this is because it's condemned and there are major deficiencies.
Correct.
Okay. Other questions for Ms. Mormon? No, Mr. Tao, sorry.
Thank you. I just want to clarify. So to grant the appeal would also to not enforce the vacant building codes. That correct?
It would be a deviation from what the legislative code is. Whatever different standard that would be used would be a significant deviation.
Great. Any other questions for Ms. Mormon? All right, this is a public hearing.
Madam Chair, council members, I'm Chris Samuel, the County Auditor Treasurer for Ramsey County, and representing this property because it's tax forfeited property that is owned by the state, and so consequently the county auditor is responsible for managing that property. And it's in that particular role that I'm here today for this discussion. We have had discussions with the Director of DSI and also the Deputy Director of DSI about this particular property and how it should move forward. They had expressed that there has been a history in the past or rare circumstances where they have allowed occupancy of the property before all the code compliance work had been done. And there was discussion that we had with them in regards to what was the level of repair that needed to be done on the property in general before the gentleman would be allowed to reoccupy, and in total so that the property would be fully up to code. And so we have had discussions with them. I'm hearing from or at the legislative hearing, we were hearing that DSI was willing to have that further discussion around what level of work would be necessary, that they were willing to consider plans. Prior to the legislative hearing, they had actually been very collaborative and talking about being actively involved in helping to develop those plans, and that changed at the point we were there at the legislative hearing to be more focused on us bringing a plan in. Now, I can tell you in our discussions with NeighborWorks and also with PED, there is some belief that a phased approach could be brought forward that would be in that.
Could I just ask, have you guys done any work on this house?
We have not.
Okay, so it's been, what, 2 months that these guys have been displaced and we've done nothing?
Correct.
Okay, that's all. Okay.
Yeah. What has happened is at the point of the last city council meeting, at that same meeting, the city council had also recommended that the property be repurchased. And the county did go through that process of approving the repurchase of the property, as well as modifying the terms for repurchase from what we've had historically. One of the pieces that the county had historically had as a term of repurchase of these properties is full code compliance. And we modified this to be the code compliance that was determined necessary by the director of DSI as part of the process. So we wanted to recognize the director had that authority within the city ordinances to determine what was necessary. And so as opposed to requiring full compliance as part of the county agreement, we were then allowing the city to say what is necessary as part of that process. We also have added a piece in there to allow a lien to be placed against the property so that it would help finance the work to repair the property. And part of what is happening right now is the family has not yet closed that agreement because in part we have three main issues that we're looking at. One is what is the level of repair that's necessary? Will they be able to move back in if it's partially completed? And those are questions that still need to be worked out with DSI. And how is the project going to be financed, which is the most difficult of the issues.
So it feels like we're way out here. We're talking about the vacant building registration. Do you want, your timer is running out.
Okay.
Do you want to get to that?
The issue is actually primarily what's the level of work that needs to be done. That was what we were appealing.
Ms. Jalali?
I guess to clarify that point a little, so my understanding is we're following the given rule structure, facing a $500, I think, building fee under the vacant building program. And you're appealing and you want an exemption from that. And I want to understand what's the basis for you wanting an exemption from that? Like, what would be the reason? Because this is actually just how it's codified. So what would be your given basis? I understand there's broader issues, but what's the basis you're asserting?
The basis of we are not appealing the fee in this case, because the fee is actually set by city ordinance at the lower amount. The question that was being raised with the legislative hearing officer is how that fee has been applied generally and when that would expire.
But to be clear, then you're not actually asking for an appeal for this. It sounds like you're asking for a bigger look at how we're applying the fees.
That'd be fair.
So you don't actually contest what we're being asked to decide on today?
The fee that was in the original notice was incorrect. We have clarified that it is the lower amount.
Mr. Tolbert?
So my understanding is what you're appealing is the code compliance.
Correct.
So as I'm sure you're well aware, our code compliance is there for public safety purposes. It's not there to be punitive, nor is it there to be enforced for the sake of being enforced. Is the county asking the St. Paul City Council to be lax on our code compliance or not enforce our public safety codified code of compliance?
They are not.
Then what are you asking?
So we are in agreement that health and safety issues need to be addressed here. And what we were led to believe in the discussions with DSI is that there was some additional level beyond health and safety that's part of the code compliance process that may be allowed to be phased in at some later point rather than immediately to allow reoccupancy of the property.
There are suggestions?
Pardon me?
Does the county have suggestions?
I think our plan forward is to come in with an approach that would allow for that phased approach that would allow early reoccupancy for review by DSI, as they have said that they're willing to review.
Why is he here?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what you're doing here. Ms. Prince?
Ms. Mormond, if I understand correctly, the building official is willing to consider, the appeal is the level of required code compliance repairs to occupy. And it was my understanding from reading the record that Mr. Ubel is willing to look at what, once the work begins, he's willing to look at how things are proceeding and determine when occupancy would be appropriate.
Correct. Mr. Ubel committed to review.
But is that what's in front of us? I mean, I think it'd be helpful if, okay, because Ms. Prince started out by saying what's in front, what we're looking at is this. So are we or aren't we?
The question, the primary question after the fee issue has been resolved is what is the standard that's applied, and it's the code compliance inspection report. Do all the items need to be addressed on it, or are they all considered life safety items? I believe because they are on the code compliance report, they are all considered life safety items. This is something that was specifically addressed by the building official. The conversation in the hearing was, I want to say 45 minutes or an hour going through the details of the entire thing. And the building official and building support the team, they don't design solutions. They won't say X, Y, and Z need to be taken care of before reoccupation. This is, the estimates discussed in legislative hearing were a $150,000 project anyway. This is something that someone is going to have to put together a rather complicated plan on, proposal on how they would recommend approaching this, apply for building permits that reflect that plan, and in the review process, the building official would make a determination about whether there could be any leeway about having part of the house occupied in some circumstances, but not all of the house. There is no other standard that the council can apply, I don't think. We have the code compliance inspection report. I say, the toothpaste is out of the tube. Yep. We know what those issues are.
And to the question, Ms. Prince, it is yes. It looks like the two pieces are both there. And I had to get, I don't have the computer in front of me, so I appreciate the question. Ms. Jalali?
Just for further information going forward, because this is such a complex case, who from Ramsey County is like most directly working on this issue with this house, with the partners, with the family? Like, who can you share the staff that if we have follow-up questions or if our offices get questions that we could best communicate with?
At this point, I would probably be the best direct contact for that, or dealing directly with the commissioner, Madis Castillo.
Okay.
She has also been involved in the process.
Yeah, okay. Good to know. Thank you. A clarifying question, that's all. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Tao.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing here is that, I mean, I just don't think that the fee, it's a hardship for the county. So what I'm getting here is a way to waive this. You want us to grant you the appeal so that we can remove some of the co-compliance, so that the tenant could move back into the facility or to the property as work are being done. Is that? I'm trying to cut through to what you want.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember Tella. We actually are not asking for code compliance items to be removed. Just that we would, as had been expressed previously by DSI, that they would be willing to have that discussion and be involved in helping to formulate what that plan was. Since they are the experts in this area, we certainly would want to rely on them in helping to frame what something that would be acceptable to them would look like.
Right.
And so that's more what we're looking for, is that commitment to work forward with DSI to come up with a workable solution that.
I think goes back to the original question when this item came before us, which is that when we don't put this vacant building registration on it, we don't have any oversight in keeping folks from going back into their property. And the question I had at the time was that who would be liable for if there was a safety issue at the property. And so I don't think the county my assumption is that the county probably don't want to be liable for that either. And so I'm going to, unless there's any other discussion, I move to close the public hearing.
Is there anything further you need to add?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Tom moves to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
I'm going to move to deny the appeal based on this is not a fee issue. I don't think it's any financial hardship. And I want to work with the party involved, Commissioner Metacastillo and the county, and we can bring the party together to figure out a way to move forward. But I think that it's important that the city establish our liability, and if it's not inhabitable, we shouldn't allow folks to go back in there until the building is up to code. Not only that, but if my understanding is that the county is also the one that initiate a code compliance in this building, and so I think what's important here going forward is that all party comes to the table and find a solution. I'll move to deny the appeal.
I would support your motion, and I just want to say that I know everybody at this table has said repeatedly that we're committed to keeping people in their homes. When you're having to help people that are homeless, you're in a much more challenging situation than keeping them secure in the housing that they have. And so I know that commitment is there. I know this has been a high-profile case. I think if Ramsey County wants to talk with the city about changing policies or practices, that it would be appropriate to have a policy session or a meeting to have those conversations as opposed to appealing an individual case at the City Council legislative hearing session. And I would encourage Ramsey County to get to work on fixing this house that has had no progress in 2 months so that we can get these fellas back in their homes. And I support the motion. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted to deny the appeal.
I am not aware of anyone else here to testify on another issue.
Which one? I'm sorry.
I'm not aware of anyone else here to testify.
All right, so we are looking at items number 28 through 64. Save item 35, which we've just heard. If you were here for an item on the agenda between 28 and 64, this is your public hearing. Is that you, or are you just taking a picture? Okay. All right. I think we might have been looking stern in your picture. Okay. So if there is no one here, Mr. Tao moves to close the public hearings and approve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the consent agenda is adopted as amended.
This brings us to the end of our meeting. Is there any news from the wards before we go to adjournment? Mr. Tao.
As a quick announcement, there's a community safety meeting tonight, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Mount Olive Baptist Church. The address is 451 Central Avenue. This community meeting is hosted by the St. Paul Black Minister Alliance, the St. Paul NAACP, and African American Leadership Council. And so you all are welcome to join us tonight.
Great, and that's tonight.
Yep.
Other news from the wards? Ms. Anker.
Thank you. This isn't technically in my ward, but for those of us interested in both the upcoming legislative session and early childhood education policy, there is a prenatal to 3 policy forum that's being sponsored by Elders for Infants and Senator Jerry Ralph and Representative Dave Pinto at the University of St. Thomas, Tuesday, January 28th, 9 to noon, and it's going to focus on legislative proposals and ideas for this legislative session related to kids 0 to 3.
Cool. Anything else? Ms. Jalali.
Mine is more fun, less
This is going to be fun.
oriented. But just to highlight good programming happening in our libraries for families on Friday, the 24th, this Friday from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. is a Lunar New Year celebration at the St. Anthony Park Library, and it's open to the public and to kids and families in the neighborhood. There will be cultural and traditional Chinese paintings, calligraphy, food, clothing, crafts, everything. So if you want to be a part of a cool cultural celebration with the city, come on out on Friday.
Mr. Toller. Someone say it.
Saturday is the kickoff to the Winter Carnival, the Winter Carnival Grand Day Parade. It's a fun time to be there. I think it's at 2 o'clock, and then it goes until February 1st or 2nd with the Torchlight Parade. So join. It's a fun time in downtown St. Paul.
Great. Any other news? And look for the city council. We're in both parades. Fire trucks. Look for us waving underneath hats and mittens and scarves. You might not recognize us, right? Okay. Any other news from the wards? All right. Seeing none, we're adjourned.